This is Mrs. Ama Echi Matilda. Because before us is the secondary education. Let's take it from this angle. When a layman is asked what secondary education means, he will see it as a second level of education in a formal educational hierarchy. What do I mean? When we say formal educational hierarchy, it means from primary school. Kindergarten and nursery are there, but they are not in the formal education hierarchy. So, secondary education is seen as the second level of education in a formal education hierarchy after the primary level. That is, after the primary education, which is number 1, the secondary, number 2, and the tertiary becomes the number 3. I said in a formal education hierarchy. But when we say a formal education, I hope you will remember it is only when we count from primary, when the children are no longer in nursery and kindergarten. Secondary education in some countries are regarded as a high school. It is a level of education where children develop critical thinking skills, where children develop critical thinking skills which enable them defend themselves and have gainful future secured. Let me take it again. It is a level of education where children develop critical thinking skills which enable them defend themselves and have gainful future secured. It is characterized by transition from primary education to tertiary education. Characterized by transition from primary education to tertiary education. On the international standard classification, that is the international standard classification of education scale, secondary education covers 2 phases. Let me say it again. When we consider the international standard classification of education scale, this level of education, that is secondary education, appears to have 2 phases. The first phase is the lower secondary, which is called here in Nigeria junior secondary education. That is the final stage of, or the final phase of the basic education. That is the primary education. Let me say it again. The lower secondary education, that is number 1 level, the first phase, is called here in Nigeria the junior secondary education. And this same junior secondary education is the final phase of the basic education. Let me explain further. We have primary 1 or basic 1, basic 2 to basic 6, which we regard as the primary level. And we proceed to say basic 7, basic 8, and the basic 9. You see, these 3 last ones are the last phase of basic education, which started from basic 1. So, this level of education, that's from just 1 to 3, has 2 qualifications. Number 1 qualification of it is that It is the final stage of primary school, that is basic education, and also it is the beginning stage at the secondary level. It is the final stage at the basic education, while it is the lower stage at the secondary level of education. So we have basic 7 to 9, which is JS 1, JS 2, and JS 3. Then the higher secondary education, which is called here in Nigeria senior secondary education, is the stage after that lower one. It is in between that lower level of secondary and the tertiary. When the child leaves the lower phase of the secondary, the child progresses to the second stage, which is the SS class, and from there it will be transited to tertiary education. This one also has dual qualifications. Here, when we say SS1, 2, and 3, we mean the normal secondary education. Going by numerology, it is graded as 10 to 12. That is basic 10, if there is anything like that, basic 11, and basic 12. And that is why I said going by numerology. This senior secondary is regarded as basic 10, 11, and 12. That is basic 10 to 12. By the time we count it from basic 1, that's why I said going by numerology, we have basic 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up to 12. But because of the standard the international community has given, it is not basic, it is pure secondary. I mean the SS1, 2, and 3. So after the lower level, which is the junior secondary, we get to the upper one, which is the senior secondary education. The lower secondary school's curriculum, I mean the curriculum that governs the lower secondary school, includes the same subjects as as we have them in the primary level. The same subjects, the same number of subjects, but with the addition of the business studies. It then means that in the primary school, that is basic 1 to 6, there is no subject known as business studies. So in the lower level of secondary school, that is the only addition that makes it different from that of the basic 1 to 6. So the lower secondary school's curriculum includes the same subjects as the primary level, but with the addition of the business studies. Then at the end of this level comes the award of the basic education certificates. That is, at the end of JS 3, at the end of basic 9, there is an award of basic education certificates through the basic education certificate examination. It is based on the child's performance. The award comes based on the child's performance. Then this certificate examination is actually expected to take place all over the states, as in all the states of the federation, but not really at the same time. The curriculum of this level of education, which will be discussed later, provides a purposeful experience for the learner. That is, the children at this level of education, just 1 to 3, has a peculiar curriculum which provides a purposeful experience for them at that level. Remember, education is about change, and definitely change in behavior, and definitely permanent change. So the curriculum for this particular level of education was fashioned purposefully for a good experience, so that at the end of that level, the child will be able to have something for his future. On the other hand, the senior level of the secondary school, of the secondary education, takes 3 years with more intensive academic experience. Let me take it again. The upper level of secondary school is the senior level, which takes 3 years with more intensive academic experience. This experience is fashioned in single subject curriculum. This experience is fashioned in single subject curriculum. When we say single subject curriculum, the educationists mean that the subjects are taught individually. For instance, the child in science class takes physics, the child takes chemistry, and takes biology. But in the lower level of secondary education, the child takes these three together in a broad way called integrated science or basic science, which we have from basic 1 to basic 9. But in the senior secondary, in the senior level of the secondary, the child takes it as single subject. That is where we have single subject curriculum. Then the present curriculum in this level of education, that is the SS, senior secondary, has a stronger focus from that is considering the child's future. It has not been like this before now, but because the government has considered the society, what would we want the children to be in future? What would we want our society to be in future? So the curriculum has actually made it stronger than what it was before now. Then from the lower part of the secondary education, we have a focus on the vocational training than the previous curricula. There is a focus on the vocational training than the previous curricula. I mean, the curriculum 1, 2, 3, as in curricula now in the plural sense of it. The curricula we had before now did not have this, it was not, they were not fashioned in this way. So this appears that it intends to increase employability of our society. That is, the curriculum we have today appears to increase employability, employ and ability. Employability considering the high youth unemployment in the country today. Let me say it again. The curriculum that is fashioned, the present curriculum, from JS1, the lower level of the secondary education, has a focus on the vocational training than the previous curricula we had. This appears or it tends to increase employability considering the rate of unemployment in the society in our country, Nigeria today. Why the lower secondary school sits the basic education certificate, the senior secondary sits the senior school certificate education. There is a difference between these two. The difference in the first one, at the end of the lower level of education, the child is expected to have acquired a kind of knowledge that will make him to be self-employed. What does it mean? That the curriculum is trying to reduce the level of unemployment in our society today. But when the child does not want to stop at that level, the child goes further to the senior level of education. That is, the lower level of education gives you the opportunity to be on your own if it is well implemented. Please take note of this. If it is this particular curriculum is well implemented, then you will see the child being self-reliant because not every child wants to further the education. Even at primary 6, you see some children dropping off. What? Dropping out of school. What does that mean? It means the child does not want to go further. Then in this case, at the end of the basic education, that is basic 9, the child may decide to sit the basic education certificate examination and have his certificate kept with him. And he will decide to put into practice what he was taught. And that is where we have the vocational training. Although there is also a provision outside the school for the vocational training, but the curriculum fashioned it in a way that the school will give the child 2 opportunities at this basic level. One, the first opportunity is this: the child will be able to be literate up to this and write this examination and now be self-employed or self-reliant. The second opportunity is that the child will be able to say, okay, I have gained this knowledge, but I want to go further, possibly to take certain professional courses, like law and medicine, engineering, etc. So at the end of the basic education, that is basic 9, the child sits basic education certificate examination. While if he proceeds and finishes the senior secondary school 1, 2, and 3, the child will sit senior school certificate examination, which he will use to go further to read any professional course if he desires. Then students are examined. Let me just chip this in. The examination body, the students are examined in a minimum of 7 and a maximum of 9 subjects. I mean at the senior secondary. Minimum of 7 and a maximum of 9 subjects, among which mathematics and English language are mandatory. That is, these are mandatory. Although there are other subjects that are mandatory now, civic, and others. So when the child comes to the end of senior secondary school, he sits and acquires the certificates. Then this level will now usher him in further, like I said, if he desires. In Nigeria, the ministry in charge of education approved 2 different examination boards for secondary education level. The ministry in charge of education in Nigeria approved 2 different education boards, namely the West African Examination Council, which some of us have, and the National Examination Council, popularly known as NECO. At the end of the secondary education, the child either gets the WAEC, that is the certificate, or the child gets NECO. In some cases, in some schools, children are encouraged to sit the 2 examinations. That is the West African examination and the national examination, the indigenous body. Then let us look at this level of education critically. We have given a background, a brief background of secondary education, which we are going to give in detail in subsequent classes. But now, let us have a critical look at the secondary education. If one of the visions of the Federal Ministry of Education on secondary education is, let me say it again, if one of the visions of the Ministry of Education on secondary education is, and I quote, preparedness for future education, good citizenship, and effective participation in democratic governance. Let me take it again. I mean to say, the Federal Ministry of Education has a vision, and one of the visions is this, and I quote, preparedness for further education, good citizenship, and effective participation in democratic governance. In other words, it is saying that we are preparing our citizens at the secondary level to have critical thinking skills, as I said in the definition of secondary education. The Federal Ministry of Education is preparing our citizens to have a critical thinking skills concerning the future education, concerning becoming good citizenship, and making sure that when they become grown citizens of Nigeria, they will be able to participate effectively in democratic governance. So this is one of the visions of the Federal Ministry of Education concerning the secondary level of education. Then it means education is an instrument par excellence for effecting national development. And that is why this vision of the Federal Ministry of Education make sure that, or this vision of the Federal Ministry of Education goes to say, we are preparing our citizens at this level for effective national development. And in other ways, we can see that there is no how a country can develop without a good education. And how can we have this? Can we have a good education without having a proper curriculum? How can a country develop without good education? And how can this be achieved without a proper curriculum? This is the only means a country will achieve a sustainable development. And secondary level of education is actually a critical level where this can be built. We need to inculcate in these children that this level of education is not a level where you have it's not a level where you have a playground. It is where you are critically built for the purpose of national development with a proper curriculum backing up our secondary education. And that is why in 1982, the federal government of Nigeria adjusted the education at the secondary level. I said that for this reason, the federal government of Nigeria in 1982 adjusted the education at the secondary level to have diverse curriculum. I do not mean curriculum 1, 2, 3. I do not mean, curricula, but one curriculum, but having different tentacles, because we are trying to raise different people in different, that is to fit in different ways that will make the country to be, to be a developed one. So let me say it again. In 1982, the federal government adjusted the secondary education to have diverse curriculum. This diverse curriculum was made to integrate academics. This diverse curriculum was made to integrate academics with technical and vocational subjects. I mean, in 1982, it was done in this way because the government has seen, or the government saw the reason why it should diversify the education. So the curriculum was amended at this level, in secondary level, so that it will include the technical education and vocational education alongside with academics. Just tell me, the child that finishes this with the proper implementation of this curriculum, that child will make this country proud. This was intended to empower, that is, this curriculum was intended to empower Nigerian citizens for self-employment. It was intended to empower Nigerian citizens for self-employment, among other reasons. But somebody may ask, so since 1982 till today, what is the result so far? The question is in the right direction. That is why I mentioned up to 3 times that if it is well implemented, the problem we have is implementation. If a particular curriculum is well implemented, we will just upgrade, we will just improve, not abandoning that totally. What I am trying to say, in Nigeria, we have had good curricula, but the proper implementation has not really taken place. This curriculum of 1982, I was actually among the first that should benefit from this. But eventually, it wasn't well implemented. Some schools will implement, while some would not implement. So, but for the planning, we have good planning of curricula all these years. But if we can implement this, the intention is to empower Nigerian citizens for self-employment right from the secondary school. Then it will have, in the long run, a sustainable development, a sustainable political development, a sustainable economic development, and a sustainable social development in our country, Nigeria. Dear listeners, in our various schools, I know most of us are in schools. If you are in secondary school, let's take this secondary education seriously and be part of the implementers. Remember, it is at the class that the implementation starts. It is this level of education that makes a country to have a sustainable development. I would like to say this time is not really our friend now. Let me go to our assignment before the time goes off. Our assignment goes like this. Briefly examine the 2 levels of secondary education in Nigeria as a step in the right direction. I repeat myself. Briefly examine the 2 levels of secondary education in Nigeria as a step in the right direction for sustainable development. I will take it again. Briefly examine the 2 levels of secondary education in Nigeria as a step in the right direction for sustainable development. And my email address is this: amaheg1962@gmail.com. Let me spell it: AMAECHIG1962@gmail.com. Let me go again: AMAECHIG1962@gmail.com. And assignment again: briefly examine the 2 levels of secondary education in Nigeria as a step in the right direction for sustainable development. Remember, hey, sounds gone. Remember, the education is the key to every development. It is the key to sustain development. And when we have our citizens educated, it means we will have a sustainable development. And it starts from the secondary level of education. And in Nigeria, we have two phases of secondary education, which are number one, the lower level, which is also the final phase of primary, and the higher level, this is the senior secondary education. We have each of them 3 years. Junior JS1 to 3 for 3 years, senior SS1 to 3 for 3 years. As I said before, the time is no longer our friend. As I summarize, the secondary education is the level of education for the development of critical thinking skills to be acquired by the oh, agora